He was alone. He was hunted. 2 children in danger, 1 unexpected proposal. What would drive a Comanche warrior to ask a white widow to marry him? And what secret hope lies behind his desperate offer? Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the small wooden cabin nestled at the edge of the frontier settlement of Cedar Ridge in 1867. Rebecca Morgan stood at the window, her slender fingers gripping the rough wooden frame, as she watched her 5-year-old daughter, Emma, play with a worn cloth doll in the dusty yard. The heat shimmered above the parched earth, distorting the horizon where endless prairie met cloudless sky. Rebecca's auburn hair, pulled back in a simple bun, caught the light streaming through the glass, revealing threads of premature gray that had appeared after her husband's death 6 months earlier. The memories still haunted her. Thomas Morgan had been a good man, a carpenter who had brought his young family west with dreams of building a new life. Those dreams had shattered the day his horse threw him while crossing a rocky creek bed. The fall had broken his neck instantly. Rebecca had been left alone with Emma, struggling to maintain the small plot of land and the cabin Thomas had built with his own hands. The other settlers helped when they could, but everyone had their own hardships to bear on this unforgiving frontier. Rebecca turned from the window and surveyed the sparse interior of her home. The table Thomas had crafted sat in the center of the single room, its surface scarred but sturdy. 2 chairs flanked it, one of which now served little purpose since there was rarely anyone to share meals with. A cast-iron stove occupied one corner, and a narrow bed where she and Emma slept together stood against the far wall. Above it hung the only photograph she owned, a tintype of her wedding day, Thomas standing tall and proud beside her younger self. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Rebecca's heart quickened. Unexpected visitors were rare, and in these parts they could mean trouble. She moved to the door cautiously, glancing out to ensure Emma was still safe in the yard. "Mrs. Morgan?" a deep voice called from outside. "I mean no harm. My name is Neshoba. I need to speak with you." Rebecca hesitated, her hand on the door latch. She recognized the name. Neshoba was a Comanche warrior who lived on the outskirts of Cedar Ridge with his young son. The settlers spoke of him with a mixture of respect and wariness. He had chosen to leave his tribe after his wife died during childbirth 2 years ago, seeking to raise his son in a place where the boy might have a chance at survival in a changing world. The army's campaigns against the Comanche had intensified, and Neshoba had made the difficult choice to step away from the constant warfare that was destroying his people. She opened the door slowly. Before her stood a man of impressive stature, easily over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a muscular build that spoke of a life lived in constant physical challenge. His long black hair hung past his shoulders, and his copper-toned skin was weathered by sun and wind. He wore a mixture of traditional Comanche clothing and pieces adapted from frontier life: buckskin leggings, a simple cotton shirt, and moccasins that made no sound on the wooden porch. But it was his eyes that struck Rebecca most profoundly. They were dark, almost black, but held a depth of intelligence and sorrow that she recognized immediately. They were the eyes of someone who had lost everything and was fighting to hold on to what little remained. "Mrs. Morgan," he said again, his English careful but clear, "I know this is strange. I know you do not know me well, but I have watched you these past months, and I have seen your struggle." Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. "You have been watching me?" Neshoba raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Not in the way you think. I live on the ridge beyond your property. When I hunt or gather wood, I see you working your land, caring for your daughter. I see you are alone, as I am alone. I see you are afraid, as I am afraid." "What do you want?" Rebecca asked, keeping her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "My son, Takala, is 7 years old. He has no mother. He needs someone to teach him gentleness, to show him there is more to life than survival and fighting. Your daughter, Emma, she is young and vulnerable in this place. Winter is coming. The settlement talks of moving the boundaries, of pushing further into the territories. There will be more conflict, more danger." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "My son needs a mother. Your child needs protection. I am asking if you would consider becoming my wife." Rebecca's mouth fell open. Of all the things she had expected to hear, a marriage proposal from a Comanche warrior had not been among them. "You cannot be serious," she managed to say. "I am completely serious," Neshoba replied. "I know this is not how your people do things. I know there should be courtship, time to know each other. But time is something we do not have. Alone we are both weak. Together we could protect our children. I am a skilled hunter and warrior. I can provide meat, protection, security. You have knowledge of farming, of the white man's ways, of teaching and nurturing. Together, we could give our children a chance at a real life." Rebecca leaned against the doorframe, her mind reeling. The proposition was outrageous, impossible, and yet something in his words resonated with the fear that kept her awake at night. She had been wondering how long she could maintain the cabin alone, how she would survive the approaching winter. What would happen to Emma if she fell ill or was injured? The frontier was no place for a woman alone with a small child. "I do not know you," she said quietly. "You are Comanche. Your people and mine have been at war. My people are dying," Neshoba said, and for the first time his voice betrayed emotion. "The buffalo are disappearing. The army hunts us like animals. The reservation they offer is a slow death. I left the warpath not because I am a coward, but because I want my son to live. I want him to see the sun rise when he is an old man, to have children of his own, to know something other than blood and loss." He met her eyes directly. "You understand loss, Mrs. Morgan. I see it in your face every day. Your husband is gone. My wife is gone. But our children are here, and they deserve better than what we can give them separately." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. His words cut through all her defenses, all her carefully maintained composure. He was right. She did understand loss. She understood the desperate need to protect a child, to ensure their survival in a world that seemed designed to destroy the weak and vulnerable. "I need time to think," she said. Neshoba nodded. "I understand, but do not take too long. Colonel Hastings is bringing more soldiers to Fort Richardson next week. He has orders to clear the settlements of any Indians not on reservations. Even though I have committed no crimes, even though I live peacefully, I am still Comanche. They will come for me and my son. If you are my wife, if Takala is under your protection as your stepson, perhaps they will leave us in peace. And you, Mrs. Morgan, will have a man to defend your home and your daughter." He turned to leave, then stopped. "My son is a good boy. He is gentle and kind like his mother was. He asks me every day why he has no mother, why he cannot have someone to hold him when he has bad dreams. I tell him his mother watches from the spirit world, but he is too young to understand. He just knows he is alone." Neshoba's voice grew softer. "Tomorrow I will bring Takala to meet you and Emma. Let the children decide. They are wiser than we are about matters of the heart." Before Rebecca could respond, Neshoba descended the porch steps and walked toward the tree line with the silent grace of a predator. She watched him disappear into the shadows, her mind churning with confusion, fear, and something else she could not quite name. Hope, perhaps. Emma came running up to the porch, her small face flushed with exertion. "Mama, who was that man?" He was very tall. Rebecca knelt down and pulled her daughter close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "That was Neshoba, sweetheart. He lives near here with his son. Does his son want to play with me?" Emma asked with the innocent directness of childhood. Rebecca smiled despite herself. "Perhaps. We will see tomorrow." That night, Rebecca lay awake long after Emma had fallen asleep beside her. The proposal played through her mind again and again. It was madness. The other settlers would be scandalized. She would be ostracized, possibly driven out of Cedar Ridge altogether. But then again, what future did she have here as a widow alone? Eventually, the land would become too much for her. Eventually, someone would take advantage of her vulnerability. Eventually, Emma would suffer for her mother's pride. And there was something else, something she barely dared admit to herself. When Neshoba had looked at her with those dark, sorrowful eyes, she had felt seen for the first time since Thomas died. Not pitied, not dismissed. but truly seen as a whole person with her own strength and dignity. He had spoken to her as an equal, as someone whose skills and knowledge were valuable. In a world where women were often treated as property or burdens, that recognition had touched something deep within her. As dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rebecca made her decision. She would meet Neshoba's son. She would see if what he proposed could possibly work. And if it could, if there was even a chance of building something stable and safe for their children, she would have the courage to grasp it. The afternoon sun hung low in the western sky when Rebecca heard footsteps approaching her cabin. She had spent the morning cleaning every surface, changing into her best dress, a simple blue cotton garment that had seen better days but was still respectable, and braiding Emma's hair with a ribbon she had been saving for a special occasion. Her daughter had asked endless questions about the visitors, her excitement growing with each answer Rebecca provided. Through the window, Rebecca watched Neshoba approach, and beside him walked a small boy with the same dark hair and copper skin as his father. The child's steps were tentative, uncertain, and he stayed close to Neshoba's side, occasionally reaching up to hold his father's hand. Rebecca's heart clenched at the sight. The boy's vulnerability was evident in every movement, every glance he cast toward the unfamiliar cabin. She opened the door before they could knock, stepping out onto the porch with Emma partially hidden behind her skirts. For a moment, the two adults simply looked at each other, acknowledging the weight of what this meeting represented. "Mrs. Morgan," Neshoba said formally, "this is my son Takala. His name means stalking wolf, but he is gentle as a deer." He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder with unmistakable tenderness. Takala looked up at Rebecca with eyes identical to his father's, wide and searching. He was smaller than she had expected for a 7-year-old, lean and wiry, with delicate features that reminded her of the photographs she had seen of Comanche women. He wore simple clothing, a mixture of buckskin and cotton that had been carefully maintained despite showing signs of wear. "Hello, Takala," Rebecca said softly, kneeling down to be at eye level with the boy. "My name is Rebecca, and this is my daughter Emma. We are very pleased to meet you." The boy did not respond, but his eyes moved to Emma, who had peeked out from behind her mother to study the visitors with open curiosity. "You are very pretty," Emma announced suddenly, addressing Takala directly. "Do you want to see my doll? Papa made it for me before he went to heaven." Takala looked to his father for permission. Neshoba nodded encouragingly. "You can go, my son. Mrs. Morgan and I need to talk." The children moved toward the yard, Emma chattering enthusiastically while Takala listened with quiet attention. Rebecca watched them for a moment, then gestured for Neshoba to enter the cabin. Inside, she poured 2 cups of water from the pitcher on the table and sat down, motioning for him to take the other chair. The warrior looked almost comically large in the small space, his powerful frame making the furniture seem fragile by comparison. Yet he moved with careful precision, aware of his size and strength, taking pains not to dominate the room through his physical presence. "I have thought about what you said," Rebecca began, her hands wrapped around her cup to stop them from trembling. "I have thought of little else, if I am honest." Neshoba waited, his expression patient but intent. "This is madness," Rebecca continued. "You know that, do not you? We barely know each other. We come from different worlds. The people here will never accept it." "Yes," Neshoba agreed simply. "It is madness. But sometimes madness is the only rational response to an irrational world." Rebecca could not help but smile slightly at that. "You are more philosophical than I expected." "My mother was a storyteller," Neshoba explained. "She taught me that wisdom comes from understanding, not from strength. My father was a war chief, respected and feared. But my mother was the one people came to when they needed counsel." His expression grew distant. "She died of the white man's sickness when I was 15, the fever that killed so many of our people." "I am sorry," Rebecca said, and meant it. "I lost my mother when I was young too. Cholera took her during the journey west." They sat in silence for a moment, united by their shared experience of loss. Outside, they could hear Emma's laughter as she showed Takala her small collection of treasures, bits of colored glass and smooth stones she had gathered from the creek. "Tell me about your wife," Rebecca said quietly. "What was she like?" Neshoba's eyes reflected pain, but also something warmer. Kimimela. It means butterfly. She was small, delicate, always moving, always bringing life to everything around her. She loved to laugh, to dance, to sing the old songs. When she became pregnant, she was so happy. She said she would teach our child all the stories, all the traditions. His voice grew rough. The birth was difficult. The baby would not turn. She bled too much. By the time she brought Takala into the world, she had no strength left. She held him once, told me to protect him always, and then she was gone. Rebecca felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She sounds wonderful. Takala is lucky to have had her, even for that brief moment. And your husband? Neshoba asked gently. Rebecca took a shaky breath. Thomas was steady, reliable, kind. He was not a man of grand gestures or passionate declarations, but he was good. He worked hard. He loved Emma more than anything. We had a quiet life, a peaceful one. When he died, it felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I am still falling, I think, trying to find solid earth again. Neshoba nodded slowly. That is what I feel too, like I am falling through empty air with no bottom in sight. But you want to stop falling, Rebecca said, understanding dawning. Yes, I want to build something solid for Takala before it is too late. The world is changing too fast. The old ways are dying. If he is to survive, he needs to adapt, to learn both worlds. You can teach him reading, writing, the things he will need to navigate the white man's world. I can teach him to hunt, to track, to survive in the wild. Together we can give him every advantage. And Emma? Rebecca asked. What can you offer her? Protection, Neshoba said immediately. I can keep her safe in ways you cannot. I can teach her to ride, to defend herself, to be strong. The frontier is dangerous, Mrs. Morgan. Women and children are vulnerable. With me as her stepfather, she will have a warrior's protection. No one will dare harm her. Rebecca stood and walked to the window, watching the children. Emma was demonstrating how to make her doll dance, and Takala was actually smiling, a shy expression that transformed his solemn face. They looked natural together, as if they had known each other far longer than mere minutes. The other settlers will turn on me, Rebecca said. They will call me a traitor, a squaw woman. They may even drive us out. Perhaps, Neshoba acknowledged. Or perhaps they will see the wisdom in what we do. I have spoken with Reverend Matthews at the church. He is an old man, wise in his way. He said that God judges the heart, not the skin. He said he would perform a Christian marriage if that is what we wanted. Rebecca turned to stare at him. You spoke to the Reverend? I wanted to know if it was possible, if your people's God would accept such a union. The Reverend said that in God's eyes, all souls are equal. He said he has seen too much hatred and division, and that anything built on protecting children and creating family is blessed. The practicality of Neshoba's approach struck Rebecca forcefully. He had not just made an impulsive proposal. He had thought it through, considered the obstacles, sought solutions. This was not a desperate man grasping at straws, but a strategic thinker planning for the future. There is something else, Neshoba said, his voice dropping lower. Colonel Hastings arrives in 3 days. When he comes, he will want to remove me from this area. If we are married, if we present ourselves as a family unit, he will have less legal ground to force me away. Reverend Matthews said he would testify that we are a legitimate Christian household if needed. So this is also about survival, Rebecca said. Everything is about survival, Neshoba replied. But that does not mean it cannot also be about something more. I will not lie to you, Mrs. Morgan. I do not love you. I do not know you well enough to love you. But I respect you. I see your strength, your intelligence, your devotion to your daughter. Those are better foundations than passion, which burns hot and dies quickly. Rebecca considered his words carefully. He was right. Her marriage to Thomas had not been a love match either. At least not at first. They had grown to love each other over time, through shared experiences and mutual respect. Perhaps the same could happen here, or perhaps not. But either way, they could build something functional, something that protected their children. I want conditions, Rebecca said finally, turning to face him. If we do this, there must be rules we both agree to follow. Neshoba straightened in his chair. Name them. First, this cabin remains my home. You and Takala will move here, not the other way around. I will not leave the place Thomas built. Agreed. Second, both children will be raised learning both cultures. Takala will learn English, reading, writing, and Christian teachings. But Emma will also learn Comanche ways, languages, traditions. They will know both their heritages. Neshoba smiled for the first time, a genuine expression of pleasure. Agreed. That is exactly what I hoped for. Third, Rebecca continued, her cheeks flushing slightly, we will have separate sleeping arrangements unless we both decide otherwise. This will be a marriage of partnership, not obligation. Agreed, Neshoba said quietly. I would never force myself on you, Mrs. Morgan. That is not the kind of man I am. And finally, Rebecca said, her voice growing stronger, we face everything together. No secrets, no separate decisions that affect the family. We discuss, we compromise, we decide as partners. Agreed, Neshoba said, standing to face her. You have my word on all of this. They stood looking at each other across the small cabin, two broken people preparing to forge something new from their shattered lives. Outside, the children's laughter drifted through the open window, innocent and hopeful. When? Rebecca asked. Tomorrow, Neshoba said. Reverend Matthews said he could perform the ceremony tomorrow afternoon. The sooner we are legally married, the stronger our position when Colonel Hastings arrives. Rebecca's breath caught. Tomorrow. In less than 24 hours, she would be married to a Comanche warrior, would become stepmother to his son, would tie her fate irrevocably to his. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Tomorrow, then, she whispered. Neshoba reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused, warm, and surprisingly gentle. Thank you, Rebecca Morgan. I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret this decision. And I will do the same for you and Takala, Rebecca replied, feeling the weight of the commitment settle over her like a mantle. They called the children inside as the sun began to set. Emma was disappointed that their new friends had to leave, but brightened when Neshoba promised that tomorrow Takala would be her brother, and they would live together always. Really? Emma asked, her eyes wide. Takala will be my brother? Yes, Rebecca confirmed, kneeling beside her daughter. Tomorrow, Mr. Neshoba and I are going to be married, and we will all be one family. How do you feel about that? Emma looked thoughtful for a moment, then smiled. I think it is good, Mama. Takala is nice, and he needs someone to take care of him. And you are always sad. Maybe you will be less sad with a new family. The simple wisdom of the child's words brought fresh tears to Rebecca's eyes. She pulled Emma close, overwhelmed by love and fear and hope all tangled together. As Neshoba and Takala walked back toward their camp in the gathering twilight, the warrior felt something he had not experienced in 2 years. Possibility. The future was still uncertain, still dangerous, but for the first time since Kimimela's death, he could imagine a path forward that did not end in despair. The morning of the wedding arrived with a brilliance that seemed almost prophetic. The sky stretched endlessly blue above Cedar Ridge, unmarred by even a single cloud, and the autumn air carried a crispness that spoke of changing seasons and new beginnings. Rebecca stood before the small mirror in her cabin, attempting to arrange her hair into something presentable. Her hands shook slightly as she pinned the auburn strands into a simple but elegant twist at the nape of her neck. Emma sat on the bed, swinging her legs and watching her mother with solemn eyes. Mama, are you scared? Rebecca paused, meeting her daughter's gaze in the reflection. Yes, sweetheart, I am scared, but sometimes we have to be brave even when we are frightened. Papa used to say that too, Emma said softly. He said being brave does not mean you are not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are. Rebecca turned and pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. Your papa was a very wise man. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Margaret Fletcher, one of the few women in the settlement who had remained friendly toward Rebecca despite the scandalous news of her impending marriage. Margaret was a sturdy woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and hands roughened by decades of frontier life. She carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. I brought you something, Margaret said, entering the cabin and closing the door behind her. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a dress of pale cream cotton, simple but beautiful, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was my daughter's. She wore it at her wedding before she and her husband moved to California. I thought you might want something special for today. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Margaret, I cannot accept this. It is too precious. Nonsense, Margaret said briskly. You are doing something brave today, Rebecca Morgan, whether the fools in this town see it or not. That man came to me 2 days ago, asking about you, wanting to know what kind of woman you were. I told him the truth, that you are strong, kind, devoted to your child, and one of the best people I have ever known. He nodded like he already knew all that, and then he asked me if I thought you would be happy with him. Not safe, not provided for, but happy. Rebecca wiped her eyes. What did you say? I said that happiness is something people build together, not something that just happens. I said if he was willing to work at it, to respect you and cherish you and those children, then yes, you could find happiness together. Margaret helped Rebecca out of her worn dress and into the cream-colored gown. He is a good man, Rebecca. I can see it in how he looks at his son, how he speaks about you. Do not let the small-minded people in this settlement make you doubt that. By the time Rebecca was dressed, with the gown fitting her almost perfectly, and her hair arranged with a few wildflowers Margaret had brought, she looked like a different woman. The haunted, exhausted widow had been replaced by someone who stood straighter, whose eyes held determination alongside the fear. The ceremony was to take place at the small church on the edge of town. Reverend Matthews had insisted on it, saying that if they were to face opposition, they should do so openly and with God's blessing clearly visible. As Rebecca and Emma walked toward the church with Margaret beside them, curtains twitched in windows and conversations stopped in the street. The scrutiny was intense, judgmental, but Rebecca kept her head high. Neshoba waited outside the church with Takala. The warrior had clearly made an effort with his appearance. His long hair was freshly washed and braided, adorned with a single eagle feather that Rebecca would later learn had belonged to his father. He wore a new shirt, white cotton that contrasted sharply with his copper skin, and dark trousers that looked slightly uncomfortable but were appropriate for the occasion. But it was the look in his eyes when he saw Rebecca that made her breath catch. Wonder, respect, and something deeper she could not quite name. You are beautiful, he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made the words more meaningful than any elaborate compliment. Thank you, Rebecca replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. You look very handsome yourself. Takala and Emma stood together, both children dressed in their best clothes, watching the adults with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The boy had started to come out of his shell around Emma, and now he reached over to take her hand, a gesture of solidarity that made both Rebecca and Neshoba smile. Reverend Matthews appeared in the church doorway, his weathered face creased with a welcoming smile. He was a tall, thin man in his 70s, with white hair and kind blue eyes that had seen too much suffering to judge others harshly. Come in, he said. Let us begin. The interior of the church was simple. Rough wooden pews, a plain altar, and windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. Margaret took a seat in the front pew with the children, while Rebecca and Neshoba stood before the Reverend. To Rebecca's surprise, there were others present, a few settlers who had defied social pressure to attend, showing their support through their presence. Among them was Dr. Harrison, the settlement's physician, and his wife Catherine. Old Tom Henderson, who ran the general store, sat in the back with his grandson, and near the front, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined, was James Cooper, the blacksmith who had been Thomas's closest friend. Reverend Matthews opened his Bible and began to speak. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Rebecca Morgan and Neshoba in holy matrimony. This is perhaps an unusual gathering, a joining of two people from different worlds, different traditions. But I say to you that in God's eyes, there is no difference between his children. We are all equal in his love, all deserving of happiness, all capable of building lives of meaning and purpose. The Reverend looked directly at the small congregation. Some in this settlement have spoken against this union. They have said it is wrong, improper, a betrayal of Christian values. I say they are mistaken. What is Christian about leaving a widow to struggle alone? What is Christian about denying a child a mother's love? What is Christian about refusing to see the humanity in someone because their skin is a different color or their customs unfamiliar? He turned back to Rebecca and Neshoba. I see before me two people who have suffered terrible losses, who have known grief and loneliness, and who are choosing to build something new together. They are not motivated by passion or foolishness, but by a desire to protect their children and create a stable home. That is as holy a purpose as any I have witnessed. The ceremony proceeded with traditional vows, adapted slightly to acknowledge the unique nature of their union. When it came time for Neshoba to speak, his voice was steady and clear. I, Neshoba, take you, Rebecca, to be my wife. I promise to protect you and your daughter with my life. I promise to respect your ways as you respect mine. I promise to be a faithful partner, to work beside you in all things, to honor the commitment we make today for as long as I draw breath. Rebecca's voice trembled slightly as she replied, I, Rebecca, take you, Neshoba, to be my husband. I promise to care for you and your son as my own family. I promise to stand beside you in times of trouble, to share in your joys and sorrows. I promise to be a faithful partner, to build a home where both our children can grow in safety and love, for as long as I live. Reverend Matthews smiled. By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. May God bless this union and the family you are creating together. The kiss that sealed their marriage was brief, almost chaste, but when their lips met, Rebecca felt something shift inside her. This was real now, irrevocable, terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The small group of supporters gathered around to offer congratulations. Dr. Harrison shook Neshoba's hand firmly. You are a brave man, he said, and I mean that as the highest compliment. If you or your family ever need medical attention, my door is always open. James Cooper approached Rebecca with tears in his eyes. Thomas would have approved, he said quietly. He always said you were the strongest person he knew. He would want you and Emma to be safe and cared for. I think you have found a good man to do that. But the celebration was short-lived. As they emerged from the church into the afternoon sunlight, a group of riders approached from the direction of Fort Richardson. At their head rode a stern-faced officer in his 50s, his blue uniform crisp despite the dust of travel. Colonel Hastings had arrived ahead of schedule. The colonel dismounted, his eyes sweeping over the scene with cold assessment. Behind him, a dozen soldiers sat their horses, hands resting near their weapons. I am looking for the Comanche known as Neshoba, Hastings announced. I have orders to escort him to the reservation at Fort Sill. Neshoba stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Rebecca. I am Neshoba. You are under arrest for violation of treaty terms, Hastings said. All Comanche must report to designated reservations. You will come with us immediately. No, Rebecca said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. She moved to stand beside her husband, taking his hand in hers. Neshoba is my husband. We were just married. He is part of a legal Christian household and has committed no crimes. Hastings's eyes narrowed. You married this savage? Are you insane, woman? I married a good man who will protect my daughter and provide for my family, Rebecca replied, her fear transforming into anger. That is not insanity, Colonel. That is survival. And unless you have specific charges against my husband, you have no legal authority to remove him from his own home. Reverend Matthews stepped forward. The lady is correct, Colonel. I performed the marriage ceremony myself not an hour ago. Neshoba is now part of a legitimate household. He has broken no laws, violated no treaties. He left the Comanche Nation of his own accord years ago to raise his son in peace. You have no grounds to arrest him. Dr. Harrison joined them. I will testify to his character, Colonel. Neshoba has lived peacefully among us, causing no trouble, harming no one. If you remove him, you will be breaking up a family without just cause. Colonel Hastings looked around at the small group of settlers who had formed a protective circle around Rebecca and Neshoba. His jaw tightened. This is highly irregular. Perhaps, Reverend Matthews said, but it is also legal and right. These people are trying to build a life together, to raise their children in peace. Surely the United States Army can find no fault with that. The standoff lasted for several tense moments. Takala had pressed himself against his father's side, his small body trembling. Emma clung to Rebecca's skirts, her eyes wide with fear. The soldiers shifted in their saddles, waiting for orders. Finally, Hastings exhaled sharply. "Very well, but I will be watching you, Neshoba. If there is any trouble, any indication that you pose a threat to this settlement, I will not hesitate to act. Do you understand?" "I understand," Neshoba replied calmly. "There will be no trouble from me or my family. You have my word." The colonel remounted his horse and signaled his men to move out. As they rode away, Rebecca felt her knees go weak with relief. Neshoba's arm came around her waist, supporting her, and she leaned into his strength gratefully. "That was incredibly brave," he said softly. "You stood up to the United States Army for me." "You are my husband," Rebecca replied simply. "That is what family does." The days that followed were a period of adjustment and discovery. Neshoba and Takala moved into the cabin, and they worked together to expand it, adding a second room so the children could have their own space. The warrior proved to be as skilled with carpentry as he was with hunting, his strong hands crafting additions to the cabin that blended seamlessly with Thomas's original work. The children bonded quickly, Takala's quiet nature complementing Emma's exuberance. Rebecca taught both of them reading and writing, watching with pride as Takala proved to be a quick study, his sharp mind absorbing knowledge eagerly. In turn, Neshoba taught Emma to ride, placing her on gentle horses and showing her how to communicate with the animals through subtle movements and soft words. The settlement's reaction was mixed. Some families continued to shun them, refusing to acknowledge Rebecca in the street or do business with them. But others, inspired by the courage they had shown in the face of Colonel Hastings, began to accept the unusual family. Margaret Fletcher became a regular visitor, often bringing baked goods and staying to share tea and conversation. Dr. Harrison and his wife invited them to dinner, defying social conventions to show their support. As autumn deepened into winter, the family found its rhythm. Neshoba hunted, bringing home deer and rabbit that he taught Rebecca to prepare in traditional Comanche ways. She, in turn, showed him how to preserve vegetables and manage stores for the long winter ahead. They worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as snow began to fall softly outside and the children slept peacefully in their room, Rebecca and Neshoba sat together by the fire. They had fallen into the habit of these quiet moments, sharing the day's events and planning for tomorrow. "I have been thinking," Rebecca said, watching the flames dance, "about what you said when you first proposed, about not loving me." Neshoba turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "I think I understand now what you meant," Rebecca continued. "Love is not just passion or romance. It is partnership, respect, shared purpose. It is standing together against the world when necessary. It is building something that matters more than ourselves." "Yes," Neshoba agreed softly. "That is exactly what I meant. I think," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that I am beginning to love you. Not the way I loved Thomas, but differently, deeply. You have given me back my strength, my purpose. You have shown me that it is possible to build something beautiful from broken pieces." Neshoba reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I love you too, Rebecca. I did not plan to, did not expect to, but somewhere between the proposal and now you became essential to me, not just as the mother of my son or the partner who helps me survive, but as the woman I want to share everything with." Their kiss was different from the one at their wedding. This one was filled with genuine emotion, with desire and affection, and the promise of a future built together. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling. "Separate sleeping arrangements," Rebecca said with a slight laugh. "That was one of my conditions." "It was," Neshoba agreed, his eyes warm. "But you also said until we both decided otherwise. Have you decided?" Rebecca stood and extended her hand to him. "I have decided." Months passed, and winter gave way to spring. The cabin became a true home, filled with laughter and warmth. Takala blossomed under Rebecca's nurturing care, his confidence growing as he mastered English and began to read the books she treasured. Emma thrived with Neshoba's protection and teaching, becoming a skilled rider and learning to track animals through the forest. The family faced challenges. There were still settlers who disapproved, who whispered behind their hands when Rebecca came to town. Colonel Hastings occasionally sent patrols to check on them, though he found nothing to justify his suspicions. But for every closed door, there was another that opened. The family's courage and the obvious love they shared began to change minds, slowly but steadily. One warm spring evening, as they gathered for dinner around the table Neshoba had expanded to accommodate their growing family, Rebecca looked around at the faces she loved and felt overwhelming gratitude. Takala was telling Emma a story about a clever coyote, mixing Comanche and English words in a way that made both languages beautiful. Neshoba was listening with evident pride, occasionally correcting pronunciation or adding details to the tale. This was not the life Rebecca had imagined when she first came west with Thomas. It was stranger, more complicated, and infinitely more challenging. But it was also richer, fuller, and filled with a love she had never expected to find again. "What are you thinking about?" Neshoba asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Rebecca smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand while gesturing for the children to join them. As they all clasped hands around the table, she said, "I am thinking about how sometimes the bravest thing we can do is say yes to an impossible question. I am thinking about how my son needed a mother, and my child needed protection, and how two broken people can build something whole together. I am thinking that I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Neshoba raised